What if everything you believe was carefully installed, not taught, not learned, installed, as one installs glass into a frame, polished, clean, pre-cut, no edges sharp enough to question, no fractures left to let light through. They gave you a story, not yours, theirs, and you whispered it back to yourself every night, like a prayer someone else wrote in your sleep. The story had structure, it had rhythm, it had thrones dressed as altars, it had silence dressed as truth, and inside it, there was no space for the voice you almost remembered, the one not from the pulpit, not from the scroll, the one beneath the breathing. It once echoed. Before the candles, before the ink, before the chains of doctrine crushed the paper flat. There was something, they say, that didn't bow, not to Rome, not to gold, not to robes stitched with guilt, something that spoke not of sin, but of sovereignty, not of worship, but of wonder. It did not kneel, it did not beg, it sang, and that song could not be sung in churches. They called it blasphemy, they called it heresy, but it was a mirror, held up to power, and in its reflection, the priest vanished, because the light needed no permission to burn. There was a page, not lost, but forbidden, not misplaced, erased. A gospel not of law, but of liberation. A whisper across the centuries. You never needed them, but they needed you. They needed your gaze lowered, your breath tethered, your soul translated into rituals they could market. So they buried it. The book, the voice, the memory of freedom that doesn't kneel. And now, like mist through locked vaults, it rises, not with fury, with remembering. You've heard its echo in dreams you forgot upon waking. You've felt its trace in the ache behind your ribs. The words they burned are still smoldering inside you. We'll show you, but not yet. The words they burned are still smoldering inside you. They rise like breath in cold air, unseen but undeniable. A warmth without flame, a pulse without name. You feel it when silence lingers too long in a church. When the priest's voice stumbles, not from doubt, but from memory, as if something once known still haunts the tongue. There were pages that did not survive the fire, but what if the fire did not destroy, only disguise? The ash became walls, the smoke became ceilings, and from those ceilings they hung silence like chandeliers. But in the catacombs, the breath remained, not of martyrs, of rebels, not of men who died for truth, but for memory. Because truth, they could rewrite. But memory, that was always harder to kill. What they feared most wasn't rebellion. It was recognition. Recognition of what you already carry. You've always known, haven't you? That worship was never meant to require a middleman. That no soul was born in debt. That no light needed permission to shine. But when they sealed the Vatican archive, they weren't just locking away scrolls. They were burying an uprising of the spirit, a gospel that didn't instruct, it reminded, didn't command, it invited, didn't condemn, it unveiled. It spoke of the divine not as a throne above, but as a garden within. And in that garden, there were no priests, only presence, no hierarchy, only holiness, no fear, only fire. A fire that teaches not with rules, but with remembering. They couldn't allow that, so they called it apocrypha. They stamped it dangerous, and those who touched it disappeared. Monks went blind in scriptoria, pages bled through ink, and somewhere beneath Florence, a voice was sealed behind a wall, but not before it wrote one final line. This is not the end. It is the remembering. You think the Inquisition burned bodies, but no, they were searching for resonance, not flesh, frequency. They feared a tone more than a sword, a word more than an army, because this gospel, this breath, would undo them, not with force, with truth, and not the truth they preach, the one that lives inside your silence. So they turned faith into formula, prayer into permission. And you? You were born into that rhythm. But rhythms can fracture, and memory leaks every time you question, every time you wonder, every time you feel something stir when all should be still. The resonance grows, not loud, but unkillable. And somewhere, beyond the scrolls, beneath the doctrine, between the rituals they told you were sacred, something waits, still breathing, still burning, still yours. But what comes next wasn't supposed to survive. It hid, not in shadow, but in echo, in the space between pages, in the breath between verses, in the silence after Amen. There, something pulsed, something not erased, but withdrawn, like a god who turned away, not in anger, but in warning. You've walked past it before, in the margins of old books, in the eyes of paintings that were never signed, in the cracked lips of statues, whispering in a language no liturgy dares remember. The priests said nothing, but the vaults knew. They held not just relics, but redactions. The Index Librorum Prohibitorum, they called it. A list, yes, but more. A ritual of forgetting. Every banned text, a wound. Every forbidden line, a scar on the soul of memory. And among them, one was feared most, not because of what it said, but because of what it undid. It undid the need to kneel, undid the idea that only men in robes could interpret the divine, undid the hierarchy that fed on guilt. And what did it offer in return? Light, but not light from stained glass or gold chalices. This light came from the marrow, the kind that doesn't shine, it glows. They say the scroll was unbound, not stitched, not sealed. It opened like breath, like a voice you forgot was yours. And in it, there was no "you must," only "you already are." But that message, simple, naked, was unbearable. For systems built on sin, what terror lies in a soul that knows its whole? So they bound the monks who read it. They sealed the chambers. They fed the parchment to flames, or so they claimed. But ash remembers. The Vatican's deepest archive, the one with no key, no name, still breathes. They call it the Somnum Room, not because it sleeps, but because anyone who enters forgets. Forgetfulness as defense, oblivion as lock. Because if you recalled what waited there, you might not return to confession. The walls are thicker than stone, not to protect the text, to protect the church from the text. A gospel that does not divide heaven from earth, that names no sin, that worships no blood, only breath, yours. And in the stillness, it dares to ask, who told you that you were broken? The echo answers, it always does, but not in words, in the ache, the dream, the hunger behind your rituals. They thought time would bury it, but time is porous, and memory, it bleeds upward, from vault to tongue to you. Because somewhere, someone remembered one line too many, and that's when the burning started. Not in towns, not in squares, but in abbeys where no one dared speak above a whisper. The fire came silent, like a breath inhaled too sharply, like a memory reawakened by accident. It wasn't only books that turned to ash, it was voices, and names, and the spaces between names. A monastery near Avignon vanished in one night, stone by stone, word by word. The chronicles simply skip it, as if it never stood. But travelers still speak of a hill where birds do not sing, where the ground feels warm even in winter, because the earth remembers. That's where Brother Ansel was last seen. He had been the scribe of shadows, copyist of texts never meant to see light. He spoke 7 tongues and none of them were welcome. When they found his chamber, the walls were black with smoke, but the ink on the desk was untouched. His final line, scrawled not in Latin but something older, read, What is divine cannot be domesticated. They erased his name from the ledgers. But some say he returned, not as flesh, but as rumor. A rumor that drifts through libraries at midnight, that causes candle wicks to flicker, that makes ink run upward on forgotten pages. He wasn't the only one. Sister Marielle in Naples spoke the line aloud, the one they feared most. Not a curse, not a spell, a remembering. Before the church, there was the voice. She disappeared during Vespers. All that remained was her rosary, melted not by flame, but by something colder, something that burns through forgetting. Because forgetting isn't natural. It's sculpted, layered, like plaster over stone, until you forget the original shape beneath. But the shape waits. The burning didn't stop with monasteries. It reached art. Icons were repainted, faces blurred, eyes turned downward, not in reverence, but in censorship. One fresco in Ravenna still bears a strange wound, a missing hand on a figure that once pointed inward, now painted over to point skyward, a single gesture, rewritten to change everything. They say the original layer can still be seen in certain light, a phosphorescence beneath the paint, a ghost of intention, because intention lingers. The real fire, you see, wasn't flames. It was the ritual of erasure. And erasure leaves a trail. In dreams you don't remember. In symbols you feel before you recognize. In stories that feel too familiar to be fiction. You think you stumbled on this tale? No. You were always circling it, orbiting it like a forgotten star. And now you've returned to its gravity. But the deeper you descend, the warmer it gets. Not from hell, from memory reigniting. Because this wasn't just about power. It was about proximity. You were never meant to need them to reach the sacred. And the closer you get to that realization, the more desperate their silence becomes. But one passage escaped the flames. Not because it was hidden, but because it was forgotten in plain sight. Folded into a hymnal, slipped beneath a chalice, carried not in parchment, but in the breath of a dying monk who whispered it to no one and everyone. It moved without steps, spoke without sound. It did not need to be read. It needed to be remembered. And the line was simple. No veil divides you. They called it heresy, because it dared to erase the priesthood in 6 syllables. No veil, no mediator, no permission. The parchment that bore those words was never catalogued. It bore no author, no sigil, no seal. Only that line. And beneath it, a symbol, a circle, open at one edge, a gateway, or a wound. It surfaced again centuries later, not in Rome, but in the hands of a boy in Damascus. He found it stitched inside the lining of an old vestment sold for scraps. When he touched it, he saw things, not visions, memories, but not his own. He spoke words no one taught him, drew constellations no star maps contained, and then he vanished. Some say the Vatican sent someone, not a cardinal, not a bishop, someone without a title, only a ring, with the same open circle. The boy was never seen again, but in the church where he had once prayed, there remained a burn, not on the walls, in the air, a heat you could feel, even centuries later, as if the space itself refused to forget. Because the passage was never just about a line of text. It was a door. And doors, once opened, do not forget how to open again. A Jesuit archive in Prague holds an unlabeled box. Its wood is charred, its hinges resist movement. Inside, not documents, but a single scrap of cloth, stitched with the same circle. Faint, worn, but humming. Yes, humming. Because some knowledge doesn't survive as fact. It survives as frequency. That is what the church feared most. Not rebellion, resonance, not defiance, remembrance. Because if enough people heard the same hum, they might stop praying to ceilings and start listening to their marrow. You think this is just metaphor? Then explain why the symbol appears in cave art, predating every organized faith. Explain why it echoes in Sufi chants, in Gnostic diagrams, in the hush between Gregorian tones. It was never erased, only renamed, but you feel it, don't you? That gentle hum beneath every silence, the one that stirs when you stop reciting and start listening. That's the passage they couldn't burn, because it was never on paper. It was in you, and now it stirs again. But what they did next was worse than fire. They buried it, not beneath earth, beneath doctrine. They did not burn the message. They drowned it. In catechisms, in creeds, in rituals so elaborate no one dared ask why. They called it orthodoxy, but it was theater. Every robe, every candle, every chant in a tongue you do not speak was a veil, and behind it, a silence more absolute than flames. Because if you bury something deep enough in repetition, people forget it was ever alive. The passage that once hummed, now whispered, then quieted, then slept, but it never stopped watching. In 1492, a scribe named Thomas, cloistered in the hills of Languedoc, was copying hymns when a line appeared he didn't remember writing. You need no permission to glow. He paused. The ink was his, but the thought was not. He turned to the older pages, and the line was there too, as if it had always been. Even in the Psalms, in Genesis, in Revelation, echoes of it. Not overt, not readable to the eye, but woven into cadence. A code not of letters, but rhythm. Thomas went mad, they said. Wrote until his hands bled. Sang in syllables no tongue claimed. When the monks entered his cell, the walls were covered, not with words, with circles, open at one edge. No beginning, no end. Just entry. The abbey sealed the room, but the melody lingered. Pilgrims who passed by claimed to hear a pulse, not from the chapel, from the stones. The church sent inquisitors. The room was destroyed. The stone ground into dust, cast into rivers. But even rivers remember. And this is what they feared most. Not a text, a frequency. Because paper can burn. But vibration? It moves through bodies. It echoes in your ribcage. It stirs in dreams. It pulses in the spaces where shame once lived. They tried to replace it with fear, guilt, hierarchies. But guilt is heavy. This was weightless. And the more they suppressed it, the more it sang. In lullabies. In children who looked at stained glass and asked why God lived in buildings. In dreams where no priest speaks, only light. A cardinal once confessed on his deathbed, the lie was not the scripture. It was the gate they built around it. But his words were erased, buried, filed under confusion. You see now? They didn't just fear rebellion. They feared rediscovery. Because if you found the gate, you might walk through it. And if enough of you did, there would be no more need for keepers, no more curtains, no more sermons. Just the sound, the tone beneath your breath, the rhythm of a truth too simple to institutionalize. But someone wrote it down again, in a place no church dares enter. And that's where the second arc begins. Not in marble halls, not under vaulted ceilings, but in a ruin already abandoned by time. Deep in the hills of Catalonia, above a forgotten monastery, lies a cave, not marked on any map, unholy to pilgrims, a place neither blessed nor damned. The locals speak of it in whispers, a cleft in the rock they call La Grieta sin puertas, the crack without doors. They say no priest has entered willingly, but stories tell of seekers drawn by a hum only felt, not heard. And one seeker arrived, a young nun named Estella, not fearful, not pious, just remembering. She slipped out at dawn, not to escape, to return. Her habit was clean, but her soul was stained with longing. She carried no lamp, only questions. She followed the hum, and it led her inside. The cave breathed. Walls glistened with moisture. The air carried a weightless pulse. She halted before a chamber. No altar, no icon, just a circle carved into rock, open at one side. Below it, etched faintly, "No veil divides you." The same words from the parchment, reborn. She knelt, unconsciously. No prayer formed, no lips moved, she only listened. The air answered, not in words, in memory. And the circle glowed, not visible, but palpable. She felt it travel inward, through her chest, into every silent corner. Her vision blurred, not from tears, from remembering. She saw visions not of heaven, but of breath before birth, of light before temple, of communion before scripture. It was not revelation, it was reunion. And the cave responded. A stone slid, not violently, softly, revealing a hidden chamber. Inside, a single table. On it, an open codex. No title, no seal. Pages filled with blank space, except for one line, inscribed in blood-red ink. The mediator is the mirror. Estella trembled. Not from fear, from knowing. She reached out, and as she did, echoes stirred. Not from her voice, from the stone, from the words. The codex pulsed, a vibration radiating outward, uncontained. The cave walls hummed. Her bones hummed. Even the air hummed. The script glowed. Words appeared. You reflect what they banish. What? That is your priesthood. She closed her eyes, and the world expanded beyond the cave. She saw congregations kneeling not in awe, but in absence, not seeking light, seeking distance, not wanting truth, wanting comfort. But she also saw others, eyes open, hands empty, breaths deep, free. No veil between them and the source. Her heartbeat slowed, not from calm, from coming home. The codex dimmed, but the vibration remained. She stood, understood. She left the codex, left the chamber, but carried its hum back through the crack, back into air no longer silent, and the cave closed, not with lock, with absence. Its chamber gone, its voice folded. Yet Estella emerged, not as a nun, not as martyr, as mirror. And the humming followed her, softly, but surely. Because once the cave opened, once the codex spoke, it could never unspeak. And the echo belonged to you now. You didn't dream, Estella. She dreamt you. Ever since the cave folded, her breath carried something unspeakable. Not doctrine, not prophecy, but tone. Wherever she walked, things stilled. Not from fear, from remembrance. Even the birds, silent, as if waiting for a language deeper than song. She never preached, never claimed, but people followed. Not to learn, to unforget. One day in the village square, a priest confronted her. He raised the crucifix high, declaring, "There is only one light." Estella only blinked, softly, then whispered, "And what does it reflect?" The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't move. But something trembled. Not in her, in him. The priest's voice broke, not from doubt, from recognition. He had heard that whisper once, as a child, before vestments, before vows, the same frequency, the same invitation, but he buried it. Because silence is safer when it fits inside rules. Still, he turned away, but others didn't. They came, not in masses, one by one, like threads remembering a loom. Estella sat among them, no podium, no book. She listened, and when someone wept, she whispered, "The wound is the window." They wept more, because something in them knew. This was not comfort. This was resurrection, but not of dogma, of dignity. Whispers spread. across valleys, through markets, past borders. Not Estella's name, her silence, the one that wasn't empty, the one that didn't echo the church, the one that hummed what the cave remembered. The Inquisition noticed. And when power notices vibration, it calls it heresy. They searched. But Estella had no address, no chapel, no shrine. She was the shrine. They arrested others, accused them of following a false priestess, but no one claimed she led them. They only said, "She listened when I forgot how to speak." The Inquisition grew nervous. Because how do you prosecute resonance? How do you burn silence? How do you shackle a hymn no tongue owns? They called it blasphemy, but behind closed doors, one inquisitor asked another, "What if the scripture was never meant to end in a book?" And that question never made it to record. But it passed, mouth to ear, generation to ache, until now. Because what Estella carried didn't stop with her. It moves still, in those who do not kneel, in those who do not need permission to be sacred, in those who hear rhythm, not rules. Estella vanished one day. No body, no grave, only a cloak, folded beside a stream, and above it, not a monument, but moss, thick, luminous, as if the forest chose to remember. And under that moss, one word, carved shallow, still, because the hum never left. And if you breathe deeply now, quietly, you'll feel it in your ribs. Not from her, from before her, from you. And that's when the next arc begins. With a name you were never meant to speak. They never said her name. Not once. Not in sermons, not in scrolls, not in whispers. Not because it was forbidden, because it had been removed. But absence leaves shape, and shapes leave shadows. And shadows remember. You felt her name once, not as a sound, but as a forgetting. That itch in your spine when you look at the moon too long. That breath you hold without knowing why. They called her the Erasure, but that wasn't her name. Only what remained. Long before parchment and pulpits, before chalice and chain, her story was written, not in ink, in rhythm. In a rhythm carved into obsidian tablets, somewhere east of the Tigris and west of the Sea of Salt. The tablets are gone now, but not the rhythm, because it was copied once, secretly, into a manuscript bound in moonskin. Not leather, not bark, moonskin. A material softer than breath, paler than sleep. Said to be grown, not crafted. Said to vanish in sunlight. Only one copy. And it moved, from priest to orphan, from orphan to widow, from widow to wanderer, until it arrived in a monastery not known for holiness, but for hiding. Monastery of 10 walls, no entrances on maps, no exits once inside. There, it was shelved, not as heresy, not as treasure, as silence. No catalog, no scribe, only one marking on the spine. She is the breath between oaths. No one opened it, until him. Not a monk, not a pilgrim. A boy who spoke no words, by choice, not condition. He swept floors, polished pews, and one night followed the hum. He found the book. It opened on its own. No ink on the first page, only texture, like breath had brushed it. Then one line appeared, not written, emerged. To speak her name is to become the name. He didn't speak it. He became it. From that night, he glowed. Not with light, with presence. Things bowed before him. Not people. Things, dust, moths, wind. He didn't preach. He listened, and when he dreamed, he saw her. Not a woman, not a goddess. A pulse, moving through stone, through marrow, through memory. One night, he vanished. The book, too. The monastery burned. No fire, no ash, just absence. And when the villagers searched the ruins, all they found was a single obsidian shard, warm to the touch. Etched on it, she listened still. They didn't understand, but their children did. Their children hummed at night, not lullabies, rhythms. And one girl, one night, whispered a name in her sleep. No one heard it, but the glass in the window cracked, and the ink in the priest's sermon faded, because the rhythm had returned, and with it, the name you were never meant to hear, but almost did, just now. And maybe, that's why you're still listening, because the next passage is written beneath your ribs. They tried to contain it. After the glass cracked, after the ink faded, they brought scholars, cartographers, exorcists. All looked at the girl. None could explain. She didn't speak, didn't sleep, only stared at the moon, not with awe, but memory. At night, her breath moved like it carried a language older than lungs. They locked her in a stone room, no books, no mirrors, only icons. And still, the room hummed, not noise, resonance. The priest sent to observe her never reported back. When they opened the door, he was kneeling, not dead, not praying, listening to her silence. He whispered one thing before vanishing. It wasn't a name. It was a return. They panicked, buried the girl's room, bricked over the corridor, closed the parish. But silence doesn't seal. It spreads. Other children began waking with rhythm in their bones. Some carved symbols in bark. Some drew circles with ash. None remembered doing it. And in each case, the same curve. The shape from the obsidian shard. She listens still. The Vatican took notice. Their archivists whispered of a pattern, centuries old. Always the same cycle. A whisper, a child, a shape, a forgetting, a fire, and still it returns. One archivist, ancient in posture, quiet in step, traced the lineage of the girl. Not bloodline, dreamline. He followed sleep. Through diaries, through margins of hymnals, through anonymous confessions, and found it. The same phrase, centuries apart, same handwriting, always unsigned. She is the space between vowels. They called it moonscript, illegible by day, visible only when no one's watching. The archivist disappeared. His room, untouched, but cold, unnaturally cold, as if warmth stepped out. And inside his pillowcase, one last parchment. Do not follow the child. Follow the silence she left. So they did. But silence leads nowhere, and everywhere. And the more they searched, the more they found themselves changed. Eyes more sensitive to shadow, voices softer, prayers fractured, not in sin, in rhythm. Some resisted, some tried to drown the silence with bells, with sermons, with sound. But rhythm is patient, and in time, even bells forgot how to ring. Only one monk remained unbroken. He wandered from abbey to forest to ruin. He carried nothing, except a sliver of moonskin, stolen long ago. It pulsed when the wind changed. It stilled near fire. And one night, under a lunar eclipse, it opened. Only one word inside. Not written, pressed, as if breath had shaped it. Near, he read it aloud, and something woke. Not around him, in him. Something old, something quiet, something that remembered her name. And the moment he remembered, he forgot everything else. Name, place, purpose, only presence remained. And now, they say he walks the forests, silent, still. But wherever he goes, ink disappears, glass fogs, and rhythm returns. Some fear him, some follow, but all agree. He doesn't speak. He listens. And that's when the questions begin to turn. Not to doctrine, but direction. Because if she's returning, where is she returning from? And why now? They began to dig, not with shovels, but silence. Because silence breaks the ground faster than tools. The monk who had forgotten his name walked into a monastery ruin. It wasn't on maps. It wasn't even on land. It hovered, somehow, between coordinates. The door opened before he touched it. Inside, dust that had never moved. Icons with no faces. And in the center, a stone basin filled not with water, but breath. Yes, breath. As if hundreds of voices had exhaled and never inhaled again. He knelt. The basin rippled, and from its surface, a reflection not of him, but of her, the girl. Older now, eyes closed, but awake, skin pale, but warm. She floated, not in the water, but in the pause before it. The monk whispered one word. Why? The basin replied with rhythm, not meaning, pulse, and his heart obeyed. Suddenly, the walls turned. Books emerged from cracks, not bound by leather, but by memory. Each book bore no title, only breath marks. Some opened, some hissed. One bled. He chose none. Instead, he stood. The floor beneath him glowed in circles. Not light, but absence of dust. Someone had stood there before. Many times. Their feet had waited, not walked. He stepped forward. Each footfall erased more dust, until a staircase revealed itself. Descending, always descending. The air grew thicker, not heavier, older. You know the scent of forgotten candles? Imagine that, but colder. The monk descended 57 steps. He did not count. His bones did. And at the bottom, a door. No handle, no hinges, only script. The same curve the girl had drawn, the curve of rhythm. He touched it. It opened inward. Inside, nothing. Not emptiness. Nothing. Space that refused to echo. He stepped through and forgot time. He walked without sequence. Memories out of order. A prayer from childhood. Then the scent of moonskin. Then a scream not yet screamed. And then he saw her again. Not a girl. Not a woman. A shape. Made of pause and presence. She spoke, not in sound, but gravity. You felt the meaning before it arrived. I never left. You just stopped listening. He fell, not from height, from understanding. And when he opened his eyes, he was somewhere else. A chapel, abandoned, but warm. And in his lap, a page, written in breath marks. No ink, no letters, only space. He held it, felt nothing, but knew everything. Because now, the rhythm was inside him, not an infection, a return. And he knew he wasn't the first. There had been others, centuries ago, marked by the same rhythm, carriers of unspoken books. Some were burned, some buried, but some survived, changed names, changed robes, and disappeared. Until now. Now, they stir again. You might have passed one in the street. You might be one. Not yet awakened, but listening. And if that rhythm begins to rise inside you, do not fear it. Fear only silence, because silence is where they hid her. And now she moves through story, through rhythm, through you. And the basin is no longer still. It ripples again, but this time, not with memory, with return. The page began to warm, not like fire. Fire destroys. This heat unfolded, like a sleeping animal remembering breath. The monk didn't flinch. He understood now. Pain was not the enemy. It was the gatekeeper. So he let it burn. Not his skin, his knowing. The old certainties peeled away like ash. He stood, page in hand, and looked up. The chapel's ceiling was gone. Above him, stars that didn't match any sky chart, constellations of disobedience, planets that pulsed like thoughts. One moved, not a star, an eye. Watching, he didn't bow. He blinked. That was enough. The page folded itself and slipped beneath his ribs. He didn't stop it. Now he walked not with feet, but with rhythm. Each step echoed in places he hadn't reached. And behind him, others began to stir. One in the woods, one beneath a ruined school, one inside a bell that had never rung. Each had forgotten, but the page remembered. And so, they moved. You might ask, where? But that question is designed to keep you still. The rhythm does not go to places. It goes to when. And the next when came like a crack through silence. The monk stood at a river. Not water. Time. It flowed backward. Each drop. A memory someone had denied. A child who saw angels and was punished. A woman who heard stars whisper and was drowned. A man who dreamed a spiral and awoke marked. He knelt again. Not in worship. In warning. Because from that river came a sound. A name. Not spoken. Restored. It landed in his mind like a candle falling into a dry chapel. It lit, and with it, pages. Hundreds, not written. Waking, they flew from the water like birds made of breath. Each landed in a hand, but not his, yours. You feel it now, don't you? That subtle pulse behind your ribs? That pressure, like a whisper trying to become word. Don't resist. It's how they return. The forgotten, the erased. The ones who sang truth until silence devoured their tongues. Now their voices move through rhythm, and rhythm moves through you. In the river, something rises. Not a body. A tower, built from memory. Each stone, a phrase once banned. Each step, a heresy that refused to fade. He climbs, not for height, for signal. Because the higher he gets, the more he remembers. And at the top, a bell. Silent, untouched, but near it, a mark. The same curve. You know it now, don't you? You've seen it, felt it. It isn't a symbol, it's a doorway. He places his hand on the bell, and it trembles, but it does not ring. Instead, it breathes, like the basin, like the page, like you, and in that breath, a question. Are you ready to wake the others? But before he can answer, the sky breaks. Not with lightning, with memory, and what falls from it isn't rain. It's letters, burned from books once erased. They land softly, each one a name, and one of them is yours. But what it reveals next was hidden even from the watchers. The letter that held your name did not land in your hand. It hovered, as if uncertain whether you were ready. Its glow was not light, it was recognition. And in that moment, your ribs unlocked, not with sound, with silence. A silence that had waited centuries to speak. You reached, but before your fingers touched it, the air folded, not collapsed, inverted. Time blinked, and suddenly, the monk was beside you. Older, he didn't speak, but you understood. He had seen it too. Not the letter, the library, the one buried not in earth, but in perception. A vault beneath forgetting, built by those who understood. That truth is not destroyed by fire, only revealed by it. Together, you walked, not on ground, on glyphs, symbols lit beneath your feet as you stepped. Each one, a fragment of a doctrine erased, not because it was false, but because it couldn't be owned. You passed a column. It breathed. Another. It wept. By the third you knew. This was not architecture. It was testimony, and it was alive. At the center, a door. No handle, No hinge. Only a single phrase etched in something not quite stone. No truth can be possessed, only remembered. The monk placed his hand upon it. It did not open. It listened. And when you echoed the phrase, not with voice but with memory, it sighed and let you in. The light inside was not light. It was script, free-floating, pages that had never been printed, books that had never been bound, ideas that had never been allowed. They moved around you like smoke with purpose. One touched your shoulder. You saw a face. Hers, the woman from the river. But this time, she smiled, not because she forgave, but because she remembered. Another page touched your back. The child, still holding stars, still laughing despite what they did, still whole. And then, the man, the spiral, the mark, all of them, alive in the air. Not ghosts, not visions, but witnesses. This was not a library. It was a sanctuary of the silenced. And the monk? He was no longer beside you. He was within you. Not possession, permission. His memories now stirred with yours. His rhythm, pulsing beneath your thoughts. You turned. The door was gone. And behind you, only the name, yours, written in flame that did not burn. It hovered once more. But this time, it entered. And when it did, you remembered what you were never told, that the church feared not lies, but memory. Because memory cannot be argued, only hidden. And they tried. Oh, they tried. But memory, once named, becomes prophecy. And prophecy, once awakened, becomes movement. You took a step. The walls shifted. You weren't underground. You were beneath time. Each direction led to a century you never lived, but somehow recalled. And ahead, a hall of mirrors, but not your reflection. Each one, a life you never lived but were meant to. One as a scribe, one as a heretic, one as a midwife who named stars. Each version of you burned in different eras, but each now returned. And as you passed each mirror, they nodded. You weren't alone. Not anymore. But just as you touched the final mirror, it shattered. Not broken. Unlocked. And behind it, a stairway of black glass leading up. But what was waiting at the top had not breathed since the Sibyls fell silent. Your foot touched the first step. It didn't echo. It answered. A low hum moved through the glass, as if each stair remembered who last ascended, and who never returned. You climbed, not quickly. Each step required not effort, but confession, and not aloud. The stairway knew your forgetting, and demanded you name it. You spoke nothing, but within, entire lifetimes uncoiled. The time you walked past a book you should have opened. The night you silenced a question that arrived in a dream. The hour your breath caught, not from fear, but recognition. All offered, all known, and the glass welcomed it. Each confession became light beneath your heel, and so you rose. At the 17th step, the air changed. Not temperature, not pressure, purpose. It no longer held weight, but intention. You weren't being led upward. You were being invited. The glass began to shimmer. Faint images emerged beneath the surface. A woman with a crown of ivy. A boy writing on a wall of stars. A lion with no mouth, only eyes. Each stared through you. Each asked the same question. Will you carry it? But you didn't answer yet. At the top, a chamber. Circular. Unmarked. Its ceiling, obsidian sky with no stars. Its floor, sand that remembered footsteps even after centuries. In the center, a seat, not a throne. A place once known to the Sibyls. A stone so old it pulsed. You approached, but something else was there. Not someone, something. A presence that had waited too long. You felt it behind your ribs, beneath your language, before your beliefs. It had no shape, only an outline of absence, and it spoke, without sound. You remember enough. Now, receive the rest. Your knees didn't bend. They yielded, not from worship, from return. You sat. The sand moved. The chamber sealed. And inside that stillness, everything accelerated. You were a child in a room with no door, drawing spirals on the floor. You were a priest, burying a page he was told to forget. You were a woman screaming a name in a language erased before birth. And all of them, you, all of them, alive, not in memory, in you. A rush came, but not air, not wind, testimony. A flood of voices too ancient for scripture, too sacred for dogma. The ones who whispered to Galileo, who bled for words in Alexandria, who sang beneath Sumerian moons. They entered not your ears, but your name, and as they did, you felt your spine align, not to posture, to truth. You stood, not higher, but deeper. You were not the same. You were now inscribed. And before you, the seat changed. It unfolded, revealing what had been hidden even here. A scroll, not papyrus, not leather. It pulsed. Alive. It did not wait for hands. It entered breath, and with it, the final fragment of the manuscript of the unnamed moon. A name so old, it had been broken into light. And as it fused with you, you saw. The church had not sealed one archive. They sealed 7, and only one had opened. The others, still dreaming beneath cathedrals, deserts, and oceans. But now, one had awakened. And awakening is contagious. You turned. The stairway was gone. But the voices weren't. They now waited for your step. Because prophecy is not a future. It is a return. And one page still shimmered in your palm. Blank. Waiting. Not for ink. For choice. You carried the scroll. But it did not feel like carrying. It felt like remembering. It glowed faintly. Not with light, but with possibility. And the chamber behind you disappeared. Not closed. Rewritten. The floor beneath your feet became mosaic. Fractured maps of cities never built. You stood upon Babel's twin, Atlantis's dream, Uruk's unfinished prayer, but you walked forward, because what calls you now isn't place. It's pattern. Ahead, a gate, formless at first until you neared, then shape. A doorway made not of stone, but questions, each etched into air. Who let you enter? Whose silence do you carry? What was erased to make space for you? They didn't ask for answers. They asked for memory, and memory responded. You touched the scroll to the gate. The questions burned. Not away, through. They passed into you, and the gate allowed passage. On the other side, not freedom, a garden, but not of flowers, of moments. Moments that bloomed and withered in cycles no calendar could name. Here, a monk burying his robes in exchange for stars. There, a woman painting her dreams before language reached them. Beyond, a child reciting syllables never taught aloud, each frozen, each repeating, each incomplete. And in the center, a fountain. Its water didn't ripple. It reflected only what you refused to see. You stepped closer. It did not wait. It welcomed. The surface shifted, and there, your face, but older, wiser, wounded. And then another version, younger, more afraid, eyes wide with unspoken knowing. Then another, dozens, hundreds. All you, all choices you never made, all paths left unwalked, all truths unopened. And the scroll pulsed. Each version of you turned, faced you, spoke as one. You've opened one gate, but the next is not a door. It is a word. It cannot be found in books. It must be breathed. And suddenly, The fountain rose, formed a column of memory. Inside it, a name, one you'd heard as a child, in a dream, then forgot. One you whispered once in sleep and woke crying. One that now demanded return. But your lips resisted, not out of fear, but wait. Because names hold power, and this one held direction. You closed your eyes, breathed once, and spoke it. It was not English, not Latin, not Sumerian. It was the sound of a heart remembering. And the garden vanished, but not into darkness, into sight. Everything around you turned. The world wasn't flat or round. It was coded. Each tree, cloud, footprint, a glyph. Each shadow, a page. You were no longer walking through space. You were walking through scripture. Not holy, original, pre-holy, pre-fear. Before obedience learned to wear white robes and red seals, you touched a tree. It pulsed. Inside it, the lost language of the first Sibyl, the one who wrote not in letters, but in tears. You read her, and she read you back, and the scroll in your hands now burned, not to ash, to voice. It had become sound again, free, unwritten, unbound. You looked up. The sky split, not with thunder, with song. A melody buried since the Inquisition sang its last sermon. It spoke not to ears, but marrow, and it asked, "Will you sing next?" You opened your mouth, but didn't sing. You wept, because some truths don't require melody, only witness. And now, you were one. But the song wasn't over, and one more verse remained, waiting in the place no map dares draw. A cathedral beneath the sea, where time itself was first taught to kneel. You descended, not stairs, not slopes, but permission. The path revealed only as your breath changed, not deeper, truer. The melody guided you, now quieter, now behind you, now beneath your ribs. And then, water, not wet, not cold, but remembering. It didn't rise. It welcomed, and you stepped through. No resistance, only recognition. The sea did not drown. It read. Each heartbeat, a word. Each memory, a sentence. And soon, you were not in water. You were within scripture. A scripture never bound, never inked, never burned. Because it had never been seen. Until now. The cathedral emerged. Not built. Recalled. Columns grown from coral that once whispered to Babylon. Windows made not of glass, but air made solid by vow. And sound, stilled, not silence, stillness. A chamber where even echoes bowed. And you entered, not as visitor, as return. Inside, no altars, no saints. Only one object, a mirror, shaped like an hourglass, broken in the middle. Its frame, forged from forbidden metals. Its surface, not reflective. It withheld. You approached, and it whispered, "Time is not passage. Time is permission." You reached toward it, and suddenly, sight. You saw cities erased before their first stone. Laws that ruled centuries but never made parchment. Scribes who died unnamed because they wrote what wasn't allowed. And behind it all, a hand. A hand rewriting not books, but beginning itself. You tried to see the face, but the mirror cracked. And a voice, ancient, feminine, infinite, spoke. They did not burn time. They sculpted it, to make obedience feel like destiny, to make forgetting feel like peace. And now, the last truth, the calendar you follow, was never meant for you. A tremor passed through the cathedral. Not danger. Response. You had seen too much, but also just enough. The mirror dissolved. In its place, a door. No handle, no hinges. just a shimmer, and above it, a single word. Not in any tongue known today, but you understood it. It said, undo. You knew what it meant. One step forward, and all that was sealed would begin to unseal. Not in books, in people. Truth wouldn't explode. It would leak. Into lullabies, into paintings, into sudden memories in the night. You reached, but paused. Because crossing meant more than knowledge. It meant risk. You might not return. Or worse, you might return different, and no one would remember you as you were. But you already weren't the same. You carried names, faces, voices, never yours, but now inseparable, and so you stepped through. There was no light, no dark, only awareness, and then a field of stone circles, each one pulsing, each one opening, not portals, pages, and standing in the center, a figure, not cloaked, not crowned, but clear, with eyes that knew your dreams better than you did. And it spoke. You've broken the mirror. Now break the story. The wind shifted, brought with it the scent of myrrh, ink, and thunder. And as you stepped toward the figure, you knew. The final manuscript wasn't beneath sea or stone. It was buried in language, in how we name. And someone had already started to rewrite it. Someone very old, someone very near. And your name was the next line. The figure stepped closer. Not as threat, as memory. You had not seen this face before, but your bones had. Every fracture in your life, every doubt, every sudden instinct had whispered this shape. It was neither man nor woman, neither past nor future, but source. And it held out a book, not heavy, not bound, just waiting. You reached for it, but your hand passed through. The book could not be held, only understood, and as it hovered before you, pages turned on their own, each one blank, but not empty. Ink appeared only when you looked away, and each word was a mirror, not of who you are, but who you were taught to be. First page. The beginning was not creation, it was restriction. Second, they erased the goddess to make room for kings. Third, the calendar was crafted to forget eclipses and what hides behind them. You turned faster. Words bled. Some screamed, some wept, some waited. And then, a page with no ink, only fire. You touched it, and were somewhere else. A church, grand, gold, echoing, but wrong. The hymns, too perfect. The saints, too clean. And behind the altar, not a cross, a cage. Inside it, a woman, old, blindfolded, humming a forgotten scale. She heard you, whispered, "They caged me when I remembered. You are here because I hummed." Her hands, bone and blood, reached through, offered no escape, only a riddle. What is the name they fear most? You didn't know, but you knew where to find it. You turned, not in body, in language. The cathedral shattered, and now, a library, not built, birthed, from every silence, every banned word, every scream cut short by doctrine, and it welcomed you. Scrolls soared, pages flared, and one, just one, descended. No title, only texture, flesh-like, alive. You unrolled it, and it sang. Not music, reversal. Each word undid a lie, one by one. Genesis was exile, not origin. Sin was branding, not truth. Hell was designed to protect heaven from questions. And then, a name, etched in blood and breath. You spoke it. It tasted of salt and thunder, of lullabies sung through teeth, and the library bowed. Every shelf, every book, bent in respect. You had spoken the forbidden restoration. The woman in the cage was free, Not by key, by recognition. And her first word? Continue, she pointed. One final staircase. Made not of stone, but echoes. Each step, someone else's silence. You walked. And with every footfall, another story remembered itself. Names, dates, truths, dreams, lost before they were even thought. At the top, a door. Simple, unadorned. But you already knew what waited behind. The original question. The one the church buried deeper than any gospel. And as your hand reached, the figure from before appeared again, and asked gently, "Once you open this, there is no forgetting. Are you ready to carry what was never supposed to be spoken?" You answered without speaking, because your soul had already replied, and the door dissolved. Not open, gone, and beyond it, a room with no shape, only voice. It did not speak. It waited. And now, so do you, because the next word must be yours. You stood in the room with no shape, and it saw you, not your body, not your mind, but your forgetting. The voice, still silent, began to press into your thoughts, not words, weight. And beneath that pressure, something ancient began to split, not bone, not thought, but permission. You were being unwritten, so that you could be reread, from the beginning, not the beginning they told you, the actual one, a cradle not of stars, but of sentences. Before light, before sin, before the first flame, there was a name, one syllable, too sacred to speak, too powerful to forget. They tried, of course. They buried it beneath centuries of dogma, wrapped it in holy threat, exiled it from tongues. But it waited. In lullabies no mother remembered writing, in tears that fell without pain, in symbols carved onto cave walls by hands that never learned to read, because they remembered. And now, you remembered too. The syllable didn't thunder. It restored. And when you whispered it, the room responded. It shaped itself around your breath and became a chamber of revision. Every heresy once punished, now etched into golden walls. Every prophet once silenced, now seated in stillness. They looked at you and nodded, not as greeting, as recognition. You walked between them. Each had something in their hands, not books, not scrolls, but questions. And as you passed, they placed them inside you. You did not answer. You absorbed. What does obedience cost the soul? Who benefits when memory is curated? What power fears transparency the most? The air thickened, not with threat, with return. In the center of the chamber, a pillar of ink, floating, alive. It pulsed with every forgotten word. It shimmered with every unspoken grief. And around it, pages, torn, scorched, hidden. But now, circling, like moths to their mother flame, you stepped forward, and the ink reached for you, touched your forehead, and everything stilled. Then, a flood of languages, of faces, of rewritten timelines. You saw the Dead Sea open, not for escape, but for inscription. You saw the Library of Alexandria weep, not from fire, but from betrayal. You saw the moon speak, not to poets, but to farmers who planted secrets under their fields. And then, you saw the church, not one, but layers, each a costume, each built atop the ashes of the last. And behind them, not God, but editors. They weren't trying to save your soul. They were managing your script. You felt rage, not yours, but borrowed, from thousands. And with it, clarity. The pillar of ink melted, flowed toward your chest, entered, and you became the revision. You would not need to write the truth. You would be the truth, walking, breathing, whispering into the ears of those ready to unknow. And then, the chamber faded, not collapsed, fulfilled. You stood alone again, but not empty, and in your hand, a single parchment, blank, waiting. The choice was now yours, to write the truth, or carry it unwritten, as warning, as whisper, as wound. And as you stepped from the sacred into the silent, a question followed you. If truth has no altar, will you still kneel? The parchment in your hand did not age, because it never began. And what has no beginning resists ending. You carried it across a field of echoes. Each footstep reawakened someone else's silence. You passed no landmarks, but every step felt familiar, as if history was no longer behind you, but beneath, buried, not by soil, by syllables. That's when you heard it again, the voice, not the one that guided, the one that watched. It did not whisper this time. It declared, you were not meant to remember. You were meant to perform. And the field cracked. The grass split like paper, and beneath it, stage boards, wooden, blackened, chalk lines drawn. A theater, but not for drama, for doctrine. You stood on the stage, and the audience stared. Rows and rows of blank faces, each one a belief. Eyes that had read only one version, mouths that had only spoken rehearsed salvation. And they waited. Not for your truth, for your compliance. You held the parchment, and they leaned in, expecting a sermon, a rite, a return to the script. But you did not read. You tore it. Not in defiance, in liberation. And the rip was not sound. It was shiver. Across centuries, across altars, across archives. The blank faces gasped, because for the first time, they saw variation. Their masks cracked, and behind each one, someone forgotten. Someone who once asked, what if the truth I was given was edited for convenience? And the theater collapsed. No screams, just release. You found yourself standing in the ashes. No building, no doctrine, only wind and one relic. Half buried, a clock, but it had no hands. Only a question etched into its face. Whose time is this? And beneath the question, a mark, the same syllable you had spoken. The name buried before Genesis, the one that did not command worship, only witness. You touched it, and were pulled into another vision, this time a scriptorium. Monks working in silence, quills scratching. But what they copied wasn't scripture, it was redaction. Whole books being erased in ink as dark as grief, not corrected, silenced. You moved closer. One monk noticed you, did not speak, only slid a page toward you. It read, we were told to remove her name. We were told it invited chaos. But the chaos was just memory waking. You turned the page. Underneath, sketches. Stars aligned not by science, but by sorrow. A map of constellations erased from the sky's official charts. One in particular burned brighter than ink should allow. A woman made of starlight, arms open, eyes closed. And above her, one phrase. She remembers for those who forgot how. The monks began to fade, not from fear, from freedom. And you were left alone with the sketch. You folded it, not as artifact, as compass, because now you had direction. The next place was not physical. It was a memory sealed inside a cathedral's foundation. And as you stepped through what could not be seen, one question rose louder than any hymn. If even time was a manuscript, who holds the pen? There was no door, because memory needs none. The cathedral did not rise. It descended. You didn't enter it. You remembered it. Columns that bled moss, walls that exhaled dust, a ceiling painted with stars not visible anymore, not because they died, but because someone changed the sky. You walked where pilgrims once crawled, but you weren't a pilgrim. You were unwritten. The nave stretched like a throat swallowing centuries, and in its throat, a whisper, a voice, softer than breath, older than Scripture. Do not look for truth in what survives. Look for it in what was forbidden to survive. Your steps echoed backward, as if each footfall undid a chapter, until you reached the altar. But it wasn't stone. It was pages, pressed tight, fused by centuries of suppression. A book not opened but buried. You touched it, and time fractured. Not broke, fractured, like glass under strain. You saw it all at once, a council in candlelight, clerics arguing not over sin, but over sequence. Not what happened, when. One said, if we add 100 years here. Another, if we remove the comet. A third, silent, only marked a scroll with a black sun, and they nodded. Not in agreement, in obedience, to something unseen. They weren't rewriting history. They were installing a timeline, a ritual of centuries, to control not belief, but memory's architecture. Because when time becomes ritual, obedience becomes instinct, and you opened your eyes, back in the cathedral. But it was crumbling, not from age, from exposure. Because truth, once seen, corrodes all illusion. You looked up. The ceiling stars were falling, not debris, but dates, years that had never been. Epochs invented to erase something older, something unprogrammable. You fled to the crypt, deeper, where light forgot to follow. There, a chamber, circular, 12 thrones, empty. But one was turned slightly, as if someone had just risen, and on it, an object, not sacred, not cursed, just forbidden, an astrolabe. But it didn't point to stars. It pointed inward, to the user. Each ring turned not to tell the hour, but to reveal a lie lived too long. And as you turned it, a phrase inscribed along the inner ring ignited. They didn't just rewrite the books. They rewrote reality. You staggered back, not from fear, from recognition, because your birth year was there, and it shimmered, not as truth, but as a choice made for you. You touched it, and felt the edit. A silence so exact, it erased not events, but questions. You weren't supposed to find this, but you had. And now, it could not be forgotten. Not again. Not this time. The cathedral began to collapse inward, not destroyed, rewritten. The voice returned. Only now, it asked, so whose calendar do you follow? And your answer was not words. It was breath, unprogrammed, unafraid, unchained. And the next place you had to go was where the calendars were born. They taught you to measure time with clocks, but not with memory, not with the ache behind your ribs when you wake up not knowing what you've lost. You traveled north, not on a map, but through a text. A map made not of places, but of edits, where years were scratched out like errors, where reigns were lengthened, where dark ages were inserted not because of war, but because of fear, not of enemies, but of awakening. You reached the monastery. It was not on any mountain, it was inside one, a library carved into the bone of the earth. No monks, only mechanisms, scrolls wrapped in lead, pages that bled when opened, a silence so deep it had its own gravity. And in the center, not a cross, but a dial, 12 languages, 4 epochs, 1 lever. Pull it once, and you're in 1292. Pull it twice, and you're in 911. Pull it a third time, and you no longer exist. This wasn't history. It was a loop. A loop so old even the church feared it, because it didn't just undo narratives. It undid obedience. You turned the dial, and behind you, a whisper. Not again. It wasn't warning you. It was remembering you, because this place had seen you before. When? Not in time. In cycles. Each time the truth approaches, someone resets the sequence. Each time a soul nears remembrance, the year changes. The Pope dies. A war begins. A discovery is delayed. Again, but not this time. You pressed your hand on the dial, and it burned not your skin, but your name, etched it onto the wheel. Now it knew you, and it could no longer loop without resistance. The scrolls around the chamber began to unroll, pages that had no ink, only echoes, of dates not spoken, of kings not born, of beliefs not approved, and in the center of it all, a machine, not digital, not mechanical, but ritualistic, a way to sync the stars with scripture, so that heaven itself obeyed their revisions. Because if you rewrite the sky, the soul follows. You stood before it and felt your spine align, as if time had been pressing against you your entire life. And now, it receded, and in that gap, truth whispered. They didn't just rewrite history, they rebranded obedience, and suddenly you saw them. The scribes with no tongues, the astronomers with no eyes, the midwives with names erased from birth records, all punished not for what they did, but for what they remembered. You reached for the lever again, and this time it resisted, as if it feared freedom, because freedom is not escape, it is sight. You forced it down, and the dial shattered, not from force, from recognition. It had never been moved by someone who knew their real year. Now it had. And that fracture? It wasn't the end. It was the opening. Because now the calendar could no longer hold the lie, and the year that began would not be one of obedience, but of return. You thought the dial was broken, but what it broke was the illusion. The monastery around you didn't collapse, it peeled. Walls dissolved like wet ink, ceilings withdrew like parchment lifted from flame. Stone retreated, not because it was false, but because your belief was. Beneath it, a chamber older than timekeeping. No symbols, no altars, only reflection, your own face, but fractured into epochs. The you that doubted, the you that obeyed, the you that waited in silence, all staring back, waiting for one of you to speak first. You did. Who made the years lie? But none answered. Because it wasn't a who, it was a when. A decision made in silence, passed like a liturgy through centuries, until no one questioned when they were. And so the lie became calendar. Not just 1582, not just Anno Domini, but the very idea that time was linear, owned, numbered, sanctioned. You felt it unravel. Every war you thought was ancient was closer than you imagined. Every prophet you thought was lost was silenced more recently than allowed. Even your own ancestors, the ones who stood at the hinge between sky and soul, weren't from a distant past. They were from your cycle. From you. But the dial did more than reveal. It remembered. And now it wanted one more thing. To know why. Why you returned. Why you resisted the sleep of centuries. Why you searched through pages that screamed. Why you stepped where even angels lost their light. You answered not with words, but with silence. Because some truths do not belong to speech, only to recognition. The chamber accepted this. Its walls trembled, not from collapse, but from release, because it had held back the flood for too long. And now, memory poured in. Visions, but not yours. A council, not in Rome, not in light. They wore robes with no seams, eyes with no pupils, voices like inverted bells, and they spoke not to convince, but to edit. They rewrote what would be remembered. They inserted voids, not darkness, but absence. A man removed from every scroll, a year that lasted only 3 months. A child born on a date that no longer exists. You saw them, and they saw you. They paused, not from fear, but from surprise, because no one from the outside was meant to reach this depth. But you weren't from the outside. You were one of their first edits. The erased, the misaligned, the returning, and that made you dangerous. One of them spoke, a voice that tasted like forgetting. Will you undo all of it? You said nothing, but your presence answered. Because you stood, and you remembered. And that was already too much. Because now, they could be remembered too. One remembered face changes everything. You stood before them, the council of erasure. But something shifted, not in them, in the air between you. A flicker, not of light, but of consequence. Like reality asking, what now? Because by standing here, remembering, speaking nothing, you unthreaded their design. They once believed memory was clay, that if you shaped it often enough, it forgot it was ever stone. But now, it resisted. The chamber around you began to echo, not with sound, but with events. Phantom days flickered into place. A city that was erased, returned. A scroll that was never written, inked itself mid-air. A language lost in conquest, whispered from the walls. Each fragment didn't ask for belief, only presence. You looked down. The dial still turned, not forward, not backward, but inward. It pulsed not as a clock, but as a reminder. Of what? That time was never meant to be a prison. It was a garden, but only if remembered as one. And you weren't just here to expose the edits. You were here to choose. The council stepped back, robes unmoving, eyes unreadable. They weren't defeated. They were waiting. Because the ultimate trick wasn't hiding history. It was offering the chance to let it remain hidden, to ask you, softly, wouldn't forgetting be easier? And for a moment, you nearly said yes, because truth isn't fire, it's frost. It isolates, it stiffens the air, it cracks illusions you learned to love. But then you remembered the others, the forgotten voices, the broken scripts, the buried saints. Not saints by religion, saints by refusal. They didn't die for truth. They lived despite lies. And so you stepped forward, just once. Not with anger, not with demand, but with memory. And the walls shattered, not violently, like a breath returning, because the chamber was never a prison. It was a question, and your answer was enough. A book appeared in your hands. No title, no author, just pages, blank, but warm, waiting, not to be read, to be written, not to remember the past, but to begin the real timeline, one without edits, without masters, without sleep. You stepped out of the ruins, into a world that hadn't yet noticed it was changed, but it would. Because history didn't belong to the victors, it belonged to the awakened. And now, you were one of them. But something was still missing. Maybe the books they burned are still burning inside you, not as ashes, but as warmth. You walk now, not through cities, but through echoes. The world moves, unaware it was ever paused. But you feel the pause still humming beneath your ribs. Each step sounds like paper being turned. Not in a library, in a cathedral built from breath and memory. You touch walls no longer marked with crosses or kings, only fingerprints, yours. The names you forgot now return, not as facts, but as feelings. The woman who taught you silence was sacred, the man who mapped the stars not with ink, but with waiting. You don't see their faces, but you remember how they made your soul tilt. You wonder, was that history? Not events, not battles, but a tilt, a shift inside the hidden architecture of meaning. You look up. The sky is too familiar, too symmetrical, as if it was drawn, not born. You ask yourself, how many times has the sky been rewritten to match the myths they needed? Constellations aligned not by stars, but by strategy. And yet, one star moves differently, slower, closer. You reach out, not with hands, but with memory. And it flickers, not as light, but as a question. What were you before they told you what to be? A long pause. And then, warmth again. Because beneath every rewritten scroll, beneath every redacted name, something remained untouched. Your desire to know, not to know facts, but to know why it all changed. That desire can't be burned. It is unspellable, unindexable. It hums louder now, not as a scream, but as a return. To what? To a timeline that never needed approval. To a story told by moonlight, not mandates. You close your eyes, and the whisper comes again. You weren't meant to forget. And this time, you believe it. Not because of proof, but because of the ache. The ache that has no name. The ache that doesn't demand answers. Only presence. You open your eyes. The star is gone, but your hand is warm. And somewhere deep inside the world's rewritten chronicle, a page unsticks itself, softly, delicately, waiting, and something is still missing. Maybe the truth is not a scroll, but a whisper, not written, but carried. Across eyes, across lifetimes, across the silence between generations. They told you the truth must be documented, signed, sealed, stamped by power. But what if that was the decoy? What if the real truth was always oral, fragile, like a dream you try to retell but can't? And yet, it follows you. It follows you like a scent from childhood you can't name. Tonight, it smells like smoke, not destruction, but ritual. You feel your feet stepping into something old, older than temples, older than texts. A rhythm, like the breath of someone who remembered for you. You were not alone. There were others. Keepers not of facts, but of vibration. Old women who sang lullabies that bent time. Men who never spoke, but whose eyes told you already knew. But they were silenced, not by knives, by forgetting. A deeper kind of weapon. Forgetfulness disguised as progress. You were offered devices. They took your memory in exchange. Now, when you try to remember, your mind pulls up noise. But beneath the noise, a shape is forming. A voice. Yours, but not yours. It speaks without sound. They renamed time to break the rhythm. You pause, because something inside you knows. Every calendar, every clock, a chain. Soft, polite, but a chain. You were never meant to move by digits. You were meant to move by omens. The cry of birds, the warmth of morning rocks, the trembling of leaves before a dream arrives. That was your original time. Not standardized, sacralized. But when they erased your stories, they erased your synchrony. And without rhythm, memory unspools. So you ask, is it too late to remember without permission? The answer comes not in words, but in echo, a slow echo, like stone dripping water. And with it, something begins to rethread. Not history, not mythology, but intimacy. You feel close again, to something vast, but it doesn't tower, it doesn't command, it waits, like a hand offered from the dark. You take it, not with certainty, but with ache, and the whisper returns. If silence could speak, would it call your name? You don't answer, but you don't leave, you stay, and in staying, something returns. Not fully, not yet, but enough to make the stars rearrange, enough to make the dust remember it once danced, enough to remind your breath. This was never about learning more. It was always about unforgetting. And the page that unstuck, it's still waiting, but now it glows. If silence could speak, would it call your name? You ask yourself this as the darkness thickens not around you, but within, because something ancient stirs there now, not a shadow, a memory, one that never belonged to you. and yet has always waited inside your ribs like a scroll hidden behind bone. You remember the feeling of parchment under fingertips that were not yours. You remember your breath catching as your eyes moved across ink that bled with warnings. The script wasn't in words, it was in weight. Every line pressed down like centuries of silence stacked upon silence. The memory isn't linear. It comes in pulses, like blood. You see a staircase beneath a monastery. You feel the dampness of air that hadn't been touched by sunlight in 400 years. You hear a voice, not loud, but final. You weren't supposed to find this, but you did. Or maybe it found you, because it always knew you'd return. That's how the forbidden works. It waits, quietly, until your soul becomes a tuning fork. And now, you're vibrating again. You feel the resonance in your jaw, in your teeth, in the soft part behind your sternum where fear becomes reverence. You don't know what's coming, only that it's older than language, older than scripture, older than the fear that once convinced an empire to bury the truth beneath catacombs, chained in lead, drenched in salt, to keep it from rising. But salt doesn't stop memory, it only flavors it, and tonight, it tastes like grief, not sorrow, grief. The difference is this: sorrow makes you weep, grief makes you remember, and you're remembering now. Not just for yourself, for all those whose mouths were sealed, whose fingers were broken for copying too clearly, whose last breath was not a cry, but a vow. They didn't die for facts. They died for continuity, because to forget is to die twice, and to remember is to resurrect what was exiled. You're resurrecting it now, not with candles or rites, with stillness, and the silence begins to answer. Not in noise, in shape. You see the outline of something once burned. A name? No, a presence. A presence that never needed temples. It lived in weather, in women's hair, in the movement of fire through olive trees, in the sleep of children before empires rose. It lived in you, long before you asked these questions. It still does. And though you were taught to fear it, to call it heresy or myth or danger, you feel no danger now, only return, as if all your forgetting was just a detour, as if even the lies served the rhythm. And so you breathe, fully, finally, because for the first time in lifetimes, the truth isn't attacking you, it's embracing you, like it always would, the moment you were ready. And now, you are, but something is still missing. You were never meant to forget. They didn't erase it because it was false. They erased it because it could not be owned, because what you just remembered wasn't a doctrine, it was a rhythm. And rhythm belongs to no one. Not to popes, not to kings, not even to time. It was in the wind before it was in scripture. It was in the womb before it was in law. You feel it again now, not as an idea but as a pull, like something beneath your ribs wants to turn toward the east before sunrise. As if there's still a chant echoing under all your thoughts, saying, you came back, you remembered, but now you must return. Where? Not to a place, not to a year, to a state, to the silence behind the silence, to the part of you that never signed the contract of forgetting, the part they couldn't reach. Because even when they crushed bones and burned books and banned words, they never got to the part of you that felt things, that trembled when the sky turned the wrong color before a storm, that wept at the names carved into lost temples even if you didn't know the language, that knelt, not in obedience, but in awe. And awe is dangerous, because awe means you've seen something larger than permission, something holy, but not contained, and they can't allow that. Empires don't fear armies. They fear people who don't need them to speak with the divine. They fear you, because now, you no longer fear them. You've stepped beyond the border of approved memory, and what's waiting there isn't madness. It's music, old music, not made with instruments, but with presence. You hear it now in the corners of your room. You feel it in the shift of your own breath, longer, slower, deeper. You didn't light a candle. You didn't recite anything. And yet the ritual has already begun, because this is the return, not to a temple, but to your original state, before the forgetting, before the fear. And yes, it may hurt, because grief always returns with truth, but beneath it, there's peace, the kind no authority can offer, the kind that isn't written, only remembered. Maybe that's why they worked so hard to drown it. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was independent. It made the soul sovereign. And sovereign souls don't beg. They don't conform. They sing. Even when muzzled, they hum. Even when chained, they dream. Even when buried, they rise. And you're rising now, not in rebellion, but in rhythm. Your own rhythm. Older than obedience, deeper than doctrine. Maybe the books they burned are still burning inside you. Maybe you were always the archive. Maybe the forgotten wasn't lost, just waiting. Waiting for the one who would dare not to ask permission. And that one is you. But still, something is not yet said. And you feel it, like a held breath at the edge of waking. You can close this tab. You can go back to what you were taught. That stories belong in books. That voices come from pulpits. That truth has borders and history is settled. Or you can keep listening, because the next sound you hear may not be part of this world. And maybe that's the point, because what's coming now was never meant for the world they built. It was meant for you. The you that existed before the edits, before the rewrites, before the baptism of obedience. You see, they didn't just steal your memory. They taught you to fear what would return if you remembered. And yet, here it is. No flames, no thunder, just a quiet doorway in your chest, opening. And through it, a single note, the note that began before Genesis. The note they tried to bury under cathedrals, cloisters, crusades, but it always finds its way through, in lullabies, in weeping, in the way light rests on ruins at dusk. You hear it now, not with your ears, but with your origin. It doesn't explain. It doesn't command. It invites. And it says, there's more. Because the last book isn't written. The final scroll wasn't burned. It was hidden. Not in vaults, but in you. You are the unwritten chapter. The living ink. You are what survived the erasure. So now you must choose, not between belief and doubt, but between forgetting and remembering, between silence and song, between being a subject and becoming a witness. Because those who remember become dangerous, not violent, not proud, but unshakable. And unshakable ones cannot be ruled. They cannot be sold. They cannot be used. They become what the early ones were, not priests, not rebels, but reminders, living reminders that no power is final, that no version is complete, that no voice is too small to echo eternity. So ask yourself now, not with your mind, but with your soul, are your beliefs yours, or someone else's lullaby? Do you speak with your voice, or recite from a script handed down? When you bow your head, is it reverence or habit? Because the world is full of temples, but very few temples still listen. You are not here to rebuild what collapsed. You are here to unbury what still breathes, not in stone, not in rule, but in rhythm. So here is the truth, whispered now with no veil. The next page is waiting, not in the Vatican, not in the past, but in the pulse between your ribs, calling you not to understand, but to remember. And if you're still listening, not just hearing but listening, then you've already begun. They erased the stories, but one survived. Yours. They thought this voice would vanish, that once the torches died down and the parchment turned to ash, no one would hear it again. But some voices are older than paper, older than parchment, older than even sound itself. They exist in the folds of silence, waiting not to be read, but remembered. And tonight, you remembered. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. Enough to feel the breath beneath the rubble, the pulse under centuries of dust, the ember that refused to die. You've walked through archives they hoped you'd never open. You've looked at time not as they taught it, but as it feels. You sensed the edits, not with evidence but with intuition, because truth doesn't shout, it hums, and now that hum lives in you. You've seen the scroll that was never unrolled, heard the question they never wanted asked. What did we lose when we obeyed? What did we gain when we forgot? And who profits from your silence? You know the answer. It doesn't wear robes. It doesn't sit on thrones. It hides in normalization, in the lull of routines, the drone of truths repeated without love. But you've stirred, and that makes you dangerous. So what now? Do you tell someone? Do you search for more? Do you go back to sleep? Or start dreaming on purpose? There is no map from here, only resonance. Follow what echoes. Ignore what commands. Let awe guide you. Not fear, not fury, but awe. Let mystery become your mentor. Let longing be your compass. And let silence speak again. Because you are not here to win. You are here to remember. You are not here to convince. You are here to notice. And you are not here to finish their story. You are here to begin yours. Not as fiction, not as faith, but as fact felt in the marrow, that something older than history still wants to be known. And maybe it chose you. Maybe not because you're ready, but because you listened. And that's all it takes. A soul quiet enough to hear what never stopped whispering. You. Yes, you. You can close this tab. You can say, nice voice, strange tale. Or you can sit still, feel your own heartbeat, and ask the oldest question of all. If silence could speak, would it call my name? You already know the answer. So if this story resonated with you, like, share, and subscribe. It helps keep forbidden knowledge alive.